Why are the older generations richer? This week, one of the most popular articles published in the Financial Times was on the shifting wealth disparity between younger and older generations. When they conned over the income figures of the past half-century, they discovered that the fortunes of the young and the old had significantly changed. In 1961, the median income for a young person would have been considered to be relatively wealthy, whilst the median income for a person between the ages of 65 and 70 would have been considered to be in the bottom third of the income distribution. Currently, that situation is very close to being overturned. In 1961, individuals who earned the median income, after taking into account the costs of housing for a person aged 20 to 25, would have been considered to be in the 66th percentile of the income distribution. The 37th percentile would be the lowest that their contemporaries in 2012 would achieve. This story is a good example of how the intergenerational conflict narrative fits in well with the zeitgeist. The pattern of gains for the elderly at the expense of the younger generation is repeated for both wealthy and impoverished families alike. However, it is most pronounced for families that are average or poor. There is a greater disparity across generations among people with middle incomes and those with lower incomes. But I can't help but wonder if our forefathers would find the way that income is distributed today to be so peculiar. There is an expectation that younger people will earn less. For the most of our history, the hierarchy of age and income was tightly associated with one another. As recently as the beginning of the 20th century, it was not previously anticipated that younger people would earn more than elderly people. Through the process of advancing through the ranks of whatever occupation they were working in, they improved their skills and most likely reached their highest earnings somewhere around the age of 40. The shocking aspect of all of this is the manner in which income was distributed during the 1960s. The notion that the typical individual between the ages of 20 and 25 would earn more than two-thirds of the money earned by the rest of the population would have been considered ludicrous. In point of fact, a great number of individuals in the 1960s believed that it was ludicrous. A documentary that I once watched focused on the youth of the 1960s, specifically the mods and rockers. This article discussed a few of the socio-economic elements that have contributed to the expansion of these youth movements. In the early 1960s, there was an interview that was conducted with a guy and his daughter jointly. In comparison to her father, who worked as a manual laborer, the daughter was making a significant amount of money as a secretary. It was obvious that he was proud of his daughter, but at the same time, he appeared to be a little perplexed by the fact that this was the situation. A significant portion of the moral panic that developed over the mods and rockers was caused by the rise in the incomes of young people, as well as the behavior and attitudes that accompanied this rise. In addition to the fact that they were tearing around the country on motorcycles, the naughty little blighters were also earning more money than their parents. You who have keen eyes will have already figured out that the people who were in their 20s and 25s in the early 1960s are the people who have recently retired now. They were individuals who lived through a remarkable period in which the economy expanded at a rate that had never been witnessed before, and when 20-year-olds were able to earn more than their parents. In addition to that, another event took place during that time frame. In addition to the expansion of the economy, individuals with earnings in the middle range received a larger portion of the benefits. Beginning in the 1970s, wages as a percentage of GDP reached their highest point. Workers in Britain reaped the majority of the advantages of the expansion of the country's economy for a small period of time. Chart by Cristillo. While this was going on, folks with middle-class incomes were receiving a higher portion of those salaries. Earning the median wage during the 1960s, 1970s, and early 1980s was a favorable time to be in the workforce. To add insult to injury, you not only benefited from a stronger economy, but you also received a larger portion of the earnings. More of a larger portion of the pie was given to people with middle-class salaries than at any other point in history or subsequently. The majority of people who have recently retired were at the height of their careers during this time period. Numerous individuals have been able to acquire property, which, by today's standards, is still relatively inexpensive, and as a result, they have expanded their fortune. There were a lot of people who had large pension plans for their final salaries and enough discretionary money to invest in order to supplement such plans. Nevertheless, salaries as a percentage of GDP have decreased since the 1980s, and the proportion of income that is distributed to individuals in the middle has also decreased during this time period. Compared to what it was in the 1970s, a median income is now far further away from the average. At this point in time, being a middle-income earner is not what it used to be. Moreover, this is the issue that will be faced by future generations. As a result of having lived and worked during a time when the benefits of post-war economic expansion were distributed more broadly and evenly, the baby boomer generation is significantly more prosperous than previous generations. In light of the fact that they did not, subsequent generations will not be as wealthy. The number of people who are able to take a larger portion of the income is decreasing. The cost of housing is rising to the point that many people cannot afford it, and occupational pensions are being eliminated. On the other hand, if we consider these disparities in fate to be a struggle between generations, we are overlooking something. It is not the case that the young are impoverished and the elderly are wealthy because the elderly are taking the young's salary and benefits. The elderly are wealthier than younger people because they lived during a period in which the wealth of the nation was more evenly distributed, which resulted in more people having more. One of the symptoms of the greater rise in inequality that has occurred since the 1980s, the shifting balance of power in the workplace, and the decline in earnings over the course of the last decade, is the inequality that exists between generations, because they are living during times that are less generous for the typical worker. The average youngster will have a smaller proportion of wealth than the average oldster did. This is because there are fewer opportunities available to them. When it comes down to it, intergenerational inequality is nothing more than a different story about declining salaries, less secure employment, and uneven job opportunities.